All right, good morning. Welcome everyone, and thank you for getting up so early and attend Howard County Spending Affordability Advisory Committee. And I'm very pleased to see old friends and also some new members joining us this year. My name is Holly Sung. I'm the County Budget Administrator and also Chair for this year's committee. So for today's agenda, because we are this is our first meeting for a series of sessions there. So I will start with some refresh memory about the process and also introduction on the key agenda for this year, as well as maybe have the members to go around the table very briefly, talk about yourself so we get to know each other. The centerpiece for the discussion today, however, will be the HOCO by Design. I'm very excited to have a team from Department of Planning and Zoning joining us this morning and to talk about HOCO by Design, which is a general plan update that was just released last Thursday night, I believe. So it's hot and fresh. So the team will do two presentations. One is about the overview as well as the process and the highlights of the general plan. And feel free to ask questions there. And also there will be a second presentation. It's an update about the county's long-term demographic and also development trends, which is, I think, presented to the committee every year. But you'll hear the updates as well as the latest projections based on the general plan update. So let's start. So again, this year's meetings will all be virtual, and it's typically at 7 to 9 o'clock in the morning. So a little bit logistics to repeat myself here. One is that because we have many members there, if you have any, when you don't speak, please make sure you mute yourself. And when you do talk, don't forget to unmute yourself there. And on technical issues there, if you have any, please contact Paul directly. You should have already received a few emails from him for different issues there. And also among his emails there, he actually provide as a backup plan an attendee link besides the normal WebEx invite. So if you're not able to log in from the WebEx invite there, at least you can try the attendee link and we will elevate you as a speaker so you can join the discussion there. And also a reminder to everyone that all SAAC meetings are public meetings. It will be streamed, but also posted on the county website for the videos later. So you can still, if you miss any meeting accidentally, you can still come back and play the video to get a sense about what was discussed. You're not going to miss anything. About the committee, the Spending Affordability Advisory Committee, this is a very, very important mechanism for the county government in terms of decision making. This is a committee established by executive order by county executive, and the intention is to make the mechanism a nonpartisan body, and people should put aside your political opinions or political agenda and really get together and look at the data and try to provide data sensitive advice to county executive that's going to inform our development of budget and also long-term fiscal plan. It is very comprehensive and very diversified committee. We have a lot of talented people represent different disciplines of the business as well as key stakeholders, representative for different entities as well as different branches of the government. The committee discharge, as usual, the committee is asked to deliver a report to county executive by March 1st, and with recommendations on the projected revenues as well as a debt ceiling or authorization debt level, and also multi-year projection and any other advice deemed appropriate regarding the county's planning and financial planning and also budget development. And this year, a little bit new, a separate task was asked from this committee is to provide a very brief report by the end of January. Sorry, there's a typo. It should be January 31st, and which is to provide some input or feedbacks on the fiscal impact analysis that's going to be presented by DPZ regarding the HOCO by Design. So we have confidence and understanding about the fiscal impact of this HOCO by Design or the general plan update. Just a quick recap about the report from last year. The full report is available from the county's website. If you search Spending Affordable Advisory Committee, you should be able to find it. And it's very instrumental, and both the government and myself are really grateful for the very important and very useful advice we received from the report last year. And a couple highlights is that last year's a little bit unique because FY23 revenue was actually much stronger than usual despite the pandemic. And historically, we have a little more than 30 million increase each year for the county's general budget on average, but FY23 is more than doubling that. However, the committee rightfully pointed out is driven by a lot of one-time factors such as the federal stimulus impact, as well as the stocks market and a lot of other temporary elements that's not going to be sustainable. So the report rightfully pointed out that we have to keep an eye on some continued economic volatility and potentially bumpy revenue outlook, which I think is going to hover upon us in the next few years, given the rising risks on the recession currently. They also noted that the fiscal gap continues to enlarge. Even fiscal condition looks good last year on the revenue side, but demands always exceed the resources continuously and by large. The report also lists multiple recommendations that help frame the budget. And one thing I do want to point it out is that the committee provide advisory role, but recommendations are not binding, which is the adequate approach, because it's really the job and duty of elected officials between the county council and the county executive to make final decision as they're elected by the residents there. But the committee provide very important information and advice that helps impact the final decision making. In terms of planned meetings for this budget cycle, we're currently looking at about 10 meetings here, of which at least three will be focused on HOCO by design and its fiscal impact. So today we'll talk about overview and the trends. Next week, very importantly, Jeff, the research director from DPZ, will have in-depth discussion about fiscal impact analysis and also answer some questions. Then we'll come back on January 10th with more follow-up question and answers, and as well as talk about some preliminary report for that part. And the rest of the agenda is very similar to what you have experienced before, and talk about different issues impacting next year's budget. And then we're also going to leave a few meetings. We actually added a little more time for discussion. So we hope the committee will get the chance to have more thorough discussion among themselves regarding what kind of recommendation, what's the takeaway, and what you want to leave for the county executive in developing next year's budget there. And in hope of enhancing the process, we are going to ask all the speakers try to send materials in advance there. So ideally you get a chance to review it in time, so that the presentation itself sometimes can be simplified or condensed there, and allowing more time for interaction among the team members and asking questions there. We are also we also have to trim maybe some agency presentations this time, and we only try to focus the meeting a little bit more on the actual discussion where possible. By the way, some of the subjects are tentative, and one date is February 7. We may have to change because of unexpected conflict, but we will confirm and come back to the group if we have any changes there. Okay, we do have multiple members. It's very a big committee, and Spending Affordability Advisory Committee is not uncommon among different state and local governments. However, our size is bigger than usual, which I think is a great thing, because we benefit from all the talents we have. So we do have voting members. There are 15 of them. And also other members, such as a representative from some entities or organizations that do receive funding directly from the county, as well as government advisors from both branches of the government that can be, they all participate in the discussion and also are information resources providers as well. So I'll ask folks to introduce yourself, go in the order of the screen, and talk about who you are and how long you have been with the committee. I will start with Todd.
Good morning, Holly. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. I think this is my 5th year on the committee. I'm a Howard County business person and actually sold my primary business this past year. So I guess you could say semi-retired, but look forward to another year.
Thank you, Todd. Nikki?
Hi, this is Lakey Boyd. I am president and CEO of Columbia Association. I'm having an issue with my video, so I'm making sure my audio is working.
Yeah, it is. Thank
Yes,
you.
okay, thank you.
Thank
President and CEO of Columbia Association. I served last year for the first time, which was, as you've already mentioned, an interesting fiscal year, as it was at CA as well. So happy to be here.
Thank you. And Dr. Clinch, you've been here for a long time.
Richard Clinch. I'm the director of the Jacob France Institute at University of Baltimore. I've been on the committee for well over a decade. I've been consulting with the committee, providing an economic forecast and personal income projections for about 10 years. Work mostly on economic development, workforce development, fiscal and economic analysis.
Thank you, Dr. Clinch. And we'll look forward to hear from your economic outlook in January. Howie? I don't know whether Howie is available, but he's from the Farm Bureau and he was here last year. So very happy to have a representative there. Alan?
Ellen Flynn Giles. I am a former member of the Board of Education, an analyst for S&P for 25 years, and I'm active in a number of nonprofits, and I've been on the committee for a while.
Yes, thank you. She's also a very seasoned member there. And Dr. Hassan, very happy to have you back.
Hi, my name's Khalida Hassan. Thank you so much for having me back after a little bit of a hiatus for a few other reasons. So I live in Laurel. My background is in molecular genetics, and I'm a patent examiner, but I'm also a community advocate and an education advocate with experience from PTA, CAC, advocating in the Board of Ed, and also participate in HOAs in our community. And I am, invested in seeing Howard County make the right decisions moving forward. So thanks for having me again.
Thank you. And JC is also back this year.
Everybody, JC Hendrickson. I live in Elkridge. I've been on the council for since 3 years, since 2020. Yeah, it's great to be back. I'm excited to talk about the general plan and the other updates this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, JC. And next is Steve Hunt.
Good morning, Holly. Good morning, everybody. Good to be back. Thank you for having me back. My name is Steve Hunt. I actually had to look it up real quick. This is my 7th year on the committee, although as Khalida mentioned, I actually had a hiatus as well of 2 years in the middle of all of that. But good to be back. Always good to reconnect with the group. By day, I am a director at a the Department of Defense contractor. By night, I am the chair of the Howard County Board of Appeals. So have a couple of hats going on there. But again, looking forward to working with the team and come up with some really good solutions to pass on to our county government.
Thank you, Steve. Busy life, and thank you for getting engaged in different aspects. Dr. Irani.
Thanks. Thanks to be back. Been a member since 2018. I'm the vice president for strategic partnerships applied research here at Towson University. And during the night, I live in Turf Valley. So it's great to be back, and hope we can address some of the bigger problems we have here in Howard County.
Thank you. And Dr. Irani will also provide some economic presentations sometime in January. And thank you. Jimmy, welcome on board.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. My name is Jimmy Jennings. I'm with the serve on the board of directors for the Howard County Association of Realtors, and this is my first time. So yeah, just looking forward to what's going on.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm not sure, Barbara.
Holly,
Yeah.
Barbara sent a message saying she's listening on WebEx because she was having some issues.
Oh, okay, got it. And Barbara's also have been here for us for a long time and very instrumental and always with a lot of insight. So I'm happy to see her continues at the committee. Leonardo, I think he can only stay for a short time. Are you there, Leonardo? If we don't see him, he's the chair of the Chamber of Commerce and have been with the committee for a long time. Yeah, I think he has a conflict. I just saw an email. Steve.
Good morning, Steve Poynott. I like what Dr. Clinch said. I've been on the committee for more than a decade, so we'll just leave it at that. I think this is my 4th or 5th year serving as vice chair of the committee. So very excited to help however I can. I love the work that the committee does. I love the interaction with the team. And I've really enjoyed my time, learning more about the community that I live in and helping however I can. And by day, I'm the chief operating officer at Capital Bank and, lifelong banker and, really focused on, how we support our community. So thanks for having me again.
Thank you very much, Steve. And I'm very pleased that Steve agreed to serve as vice chair again. He really has been instrumental. And then also you will see him chair some of the meetings as well, especially the report writing and also coordinating some of the discussion in framing the committee's recommendations there. So thank you very much, Steve, for coming back again and helping chair the meetings. Josh? I didn't see him on the screen, so not sure whether he was not able to make it. And Josh also has been with the committee for a long time, and also is a very, very critical contributor as well. So let's switch to the right side. Tanya?
Good morning, everyone. Tonya Akins, President and CEO of Howard County Library System. I've been on the committee since fiscal 19, and it's a pleasure. I always enjoy, of course, sharing what's happening at the library, hearing about the state of our county and learning from all of you. And it's a pleasure to be back again this year.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Heston. I'm the Associate Vice President of Finance at Howard Community College. This is my first year on the committee, but I'm familiar with the work of the committee and happy to be here.
Thank you. I think you were observer last year.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome on board. Jolene.
Good morning. I'm Jolene Mosley. I'm a Howard County Board of Education member. This is my first year joining you all, and I'm looking forward to learning from you. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome on board. Jahantab? Oh, Jahantab, can you?
There we go. Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Jahantab Siddiqui. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the Howard County Public School System, and I believe this is my 7th or 8th year on this committee. So happy to join.
Thank you. Very nice to see you again. And also Valerie is also a new member. So Valerie, I'm not sure whether she has technical glitch there, but she will represent Association of Community Services there. And let's switch advisors, starting with Angela.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Angela Cabellin. I'm the Deputy CAO as part of the advisor team. Many of you have worked with Sam Sid and Jennifer Jones in the past. They have moved on to new adventures. So while I have been following all the great work of the SAAC in the past 4 years, I'm happy to join in the advisors side officially. And welcome back to everyone.
Thank you, Angela. Welcome to the committee. You have a very busy year. Thank you. Greg.
Hey, good morning. Craig Glendenning. I've been with the county for 10 years now and have been lucky enough to be an advisor for the committee and also advisor for the county council with the results of the committee and of course heading into budget. Look forward to answering any questions you guys might have from the legislative viewpoint.
Thank you, Craig. Rafiu.
Good morning, all. Rafiu Hila, Director of Finance. I think this is my 3rd year, but I had a brief hiatus as well. I was here from other capacity, so I'm happy to be back. Thank you.
Very true. Thank you. Patrick? Oh, I think Patrick also was not able to join us. Patrick is our internal auditor, and he's also one among the advisors team. Lonnie.
Good morning, Holly, and good morning, everyone. I'm Lonnie Robbins. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for Howard County. I've served in that role for 16 years, and I've been on the committee for more than a decade. So it's great to be back this morning and seeing everyone, and welcome aboard. Thanks, Holly.
Thank you, Lonnie. Larry?
Hi, Larry Tweel, CEO, Howard County Economic Development Authority. This is probably my 11th or 12th year on the committee. Looking forward to participating.
Thank you, Larry. And Larry, I think you're also going to try to organize the business panel early January, right?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all very much. So that finished my part. I'll hand it over to my colleagues in Department of Planning and Zoning. I think the first person that's going to share the screen will be Sarah. So is she on board? Can we allow her to share screen? So Brian, do you want to share from your screen instead?
Available. I'm just not seeing the share screen option. Oh, there we go.
Okay. Okay, got it. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Holly. Good morning. My name is Brian Schepter. I'm a Deputy Director with the Department of Planning and Zoning. I hope everyone is appropriately caffeinated this morning because we're about to take you on an exciting ride through our draft general plan. So we're here to talk about HOCO by design and to prepare this group to review the fiscal analysis behind the draft plan. The public draft is now available for community feedback. This presentation is intended to give an overview of both the plan as well as the process to date. We will cover the project background and initial community engagement. Then we will walk through our scenario planning, advisory committees, and focus area work. We will cover the plan's themes and contents, and we'll wrap up with next steps and open it up for questions and input from the committee. And we will meet you again in 2 weeks to more substantively discuss the plan's fiscal analysis. Thank you, Sarah. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So first, what is HOCO by design? This general plan update is a document that establishes a clear long-range vision for how and where the county will develop and grow as it adjusts to evolving economic, environmental, and social conditions over the next 20 years. The general plan is updated roughly every 10 years. This plan's goals are to protect natural resources, strengthen economic opportunity, expand transportation choices, promote diverse housing types, prioritize community character, and balanced growth and conservation. You'll also note our project website at the bottom of this slide, and there are all of the project materials, the draft document, and our comment form. Next slide, Sarah. Thank you. HOCO by Design reinforces successful elements of the last general plan, Plan Howard 2030. This plan is not a massive change in course from the last decade. Plan Howard focused on 3 pillars of sustainability: environment, economy, and community. HOCO by Design builds upon Plan Howard with policies that are more predictable, achievable, and sustainable. HOCO by Design is unique in that for the first time, this plan incorporates an equity lens into the general plan and identifies various policies and actions to facilitate a more equitable future for all. By comparison to Plan Howard 2030, HOCO by Design aims to be more equitable by advancing specific equity-focused policies which enable all community members to participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. More predictable by targeting discrete areas within the county for transformation, providing greater direction to budget priorities and sequencing of investments. More sustainable by proposing development of compact mixed-use activity centers, advancing investment in environmental programs, and recognizing budget limits. And more achievable by implementing actions that are more specific, measurable, and realistic, enhanced by fiscal and infrastructure modeling. HOCO by Design sets priorities and influences other planning efforts, which must be consistent with general plan policies. The infographic on this slide illustrates the connections. You see it informs the capital budget, functional and master plans like the Land Preservation Parks and Recreation Plan, or LPPRP, Bike Howard, and Walk Howard, and also land development and zoning regulations. Once HOCO by Design is adopted, the county will undertake a comprehensive rezoning process to ensure that our regulations reflect the policies adopted in the new general plan. The next 2 slides depict key project milestones. HOCO by Design, the draft plan, is the result of our planning process that kicked off in the winter of 2020. However, we didn't start in earnest until later in the summer and early fall of 2020, after the guidelines were adopted by Council and our Planning Advisory Committee was appointed by the County Executive and Council. We'll get into more details about our community engagement in a moment. Other notable milestones to point out here are the assessments we developed, the drafting of planning themes, our scenario modeling, and our strategic advisory groups. All of these pieces gave us the data and best practices to pair with our community feedback. This slide is a continuation of the last and brings us up to date. As you can see, additional milestones include the Newtown Workshop Series we held in 2021, and then the release of planning theme chapters this year to gather input on our key policies. And here we are with the entire public draft available for review. The scope of community engagement that has been conducted for HOCO by Design is truly unprecedented for Howard County. Let's walk through some of those highlights. This is a snapshot of our engagement metrics. Not only is the amount of opportunities unprecedented, but also the variety of different avenues for providing input and new innovative approaches used for the first time in Howard County. Despite the challenges presented by the pandemic, we received over 12,000 comments to date from nearly 1,700 survey responses. We facilitated or participated in nearly 100 community meetings. Today, we have exceeded 100 public meetings, including 28 focus groups with diverse audiences. And we spread the word through 81,000 flyers to Howard County residents. Those are the high-level metrics. Now let's take a step back and walk through how we reached those totals. HOCO by Design kicked off just as COVID was shutting down the county. We already had some plans for online engagement activities to involve the community, and with COVID, we had to double down on those offerings. We also had to adjust our strategy for raising broad awareness about the plan. We started with a robust website and social media presence. We developed flyers, postcards, and yard signs that we placed where people were, like in county parks, at Roving Radish, and in Roving Radish meal kits and library book pickups. We also translated materials into multiple different languages to reach more people in the community. Our initial engagement activities occurred in the fall of 2020. I'll walk through each of these in the coming slides, and as you'll see, despite COVID challenges, we did have significant participation in these activities. In fact, we observed the attendance was higher than many pre-pandemic in-person planning meetings. We think the ease of participating at home led to this increased participation. So you'll see some of our examples here, our on-the-table exercises, our Better Communities online game, Community Ideas Exchange workshop, our assessment focus groups and public meetings, and our Bring Your Own Question public meetings. We produced a summary of our DEI focus group findings on our website. This is our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion focus groups, and you'll find this document on our website. Speaking of documents on our website, you can also see our engagement summary that covers all of our activities, including our DEI focus groups, the initial engagement we've covered here, and more. In addition to the engagement summary, we maintained a comment log of the thousands of comments that have come through in this process to date. Advisory committees. So another important aspect of our planning process has been the work of our advisory committees. And I'm really appreciative of all of the members of those committees, but particularly the folks that are wearing multiple hats and also sitting on the SAAC. I see several of you here today. Planning Advisory Committee members represented community leaders, service providers, industry groups, and the general public, and serve as a sounding board to the project team about the community's needs and desires in the development of the general plan. We started with 37 members, and by the end we had about 33. We met about these various themes over the course of 1.5 years for several hours each meeting, helping to dig into the scenario planning and flume development. Here are some of the key topics that we covered. Honing in on the PSET strategy into the flume. Actually, sorry, Sarah, let's go back one. They advised on character area descriptions, and we also explored major policy issues such as missing middle housing, transportation, water sewer infrastructure, and growth allocation framework, as well as growth management strategies. We can move on to the next slide. We've got our strategic advisory group, also members of the SAAC here. Strategic advisory members were a multidisciplinary group of experts that acted as advisors to the project team, similar to a policy think tank. There were 3 strategic advisory groups that met to delve into specific opportunities and challenges that have been identified through the planning process. The school's strategic advisory group considered a range of factors impacting planning for school facilities and population growth. The Housing and Neighborhoods Strategic Advisory Group focused on missing middle housing opportunities and continued some of the work of the HUMP. Finally, the Environment Strategic Advisory Group discussed climate change adaptation, mitigation, and resiliency challenges, as well as natural resource protection and restoration measures. Adaptation and resiliency challenges include identifying communities most vulnerable to climate change and developing solutions related to land use that can help them become more resilient. Each of these groups developed a matrix of policy recommendations, many of which are now in the planning theme chapters. As I mentioned, we work with a team of consultants and national experts in comprehensive planning and local expertise. As a foundation for this update to the plan, they prepared physical assessments. This is the page of our website where the assessments are hosted. Each one was used to create a baseline set of data for the general plan and provides a summary of existing conditions and areas for further study. The Housing Opportunities Master Plan, or HOMP, did a needs assessment specific to housing needs in the county, and that was used as our housing assessment to meet the state's requirements that require local jurisdictions to assess housing needs as part of the comprehensive planning process. The RCLCO study established economic and market conditions for the plan. Here, they projected demand of 31,000 homes over the next 20 years, and in addition have suggested there is another 20,000 in pent-up demand or unmet demand for households that already live in the Baltimore region but would prefer to live in Howard County if the option were available to them. Together, they suggest the county could accommodate a total of 51,000 new homes in the 20-year planning horizon. This would be assuming we experience the requisite job growth, which fuels a need for nearby homes. They project 60,000 job demand. We have the capacity for 30,000, so they are projecting twice as much as our current capacity. In terms of commercial growth, while uncertain at this moment, they projected 16 million square feet, of which 7.5 is industrial and manufacturing, and approximately 6 million is office. They're projecting demand for 31,000 homes over the next 20 years. So that's the demand side. Our market consultants have told us there's demand for new housing and a need to find space for new employees. We turn to our existing land uses in the county and look at where could this new growth be accommodated. This is a current land use map. It shows where commercial, industrial, and housing is located, in addition to where land is preserved. One of the most striking things about the general plan and where the county is today is how little truly undeveloped land remains in the county. Our land use assessment placed that number at 2%. So Howard County is largely built out. Given this demand and knowing we need to accommodate this demand, or a portion of it, so we can continue to provide services to our residents and maintain our infrastructure. A key underlying condition of this update process is that, given the limited supply of undeveloped land, we are focusing our efforts on redevelopment. Amy will talk more about this in just a moment.
All right. Well, thank you, Brian. I am Amy Gowan. I'm the Director of Department of Planning and Zoning. And I thank you for having us here today. This is probably my third time talking about HOCO by Design with this committee. So I'm excited that we're here to share the fruits of our labor as we have a complete plan to share with you now. So now that Brian has covered the process and some of the formative planning stages, I'm going to get into the nuts and bolts of the plan, starting with the development of our future land use map, or what we call the FLUME. And our land use map, it's data driven and it's based on land use modeling and also through an iterative scenario planning process through which we again engage the community, as you'll see a common theme throughout this. this whole project. Next slide, please, Sarah. So when I refer to scenario planning, what is that? So basically, it's a quantitative process. We use a modeling software called Community Viz to run this analysis, and it allows us to think about ways we can grow and what the impacts are. So for HOCO by Design, we modeled 4 different scenarios that provided different alternative futures for the county. Each scenario was presented as a series of options to the public so that they could look at them, understand what the trade-offs were for each growth scenario. And we also were able to evaluate both the fiscal and the infrastructure impacts so the implications could be understood. So you'll see here the 4 different scenarios labeled A, B, C, and D, and they basically ranged from the status quo in scenario A, looking at various alternatives that included opportunities for high intensity development, perhaps at levels that could support potential for transit, as well as more moderated growth levels. We looked at targeted activity centers. You see those red dots, those depict downtown and the gateway area as potential large activity centers. And then we looked at scenario D, which was countywide growth. We presented all of these to the public at a series of growth choice workshops, and we received input from them through an online survey. And then above them, you'll see that graphic that looks like little thermometers. Well, basically that was us evaluating the impacts. So we could look at the number of new residential units, the number of jobs, the industrial and commercial square footage, and we did a fiscal impact study on each of these. And we looked at the impacts to things like water and sewer, and other infrastructure, fire, et cetera, in the county. All of this, for anyone who wanted to, is analytical and maybe wanted to do a deep dive, can find this in our scenario planning guide, which is on our website. And then from there, we developed a hybrid scenario. So we didn't use one of the 4, we used components of the 4, and I'll get into that a little bit. And we based that on a character area palette that you see right here. So there are 18 character areas, which essentially are unique and discernible areas of the community that are depicted on the future land use map. The categories describe important elements that work together to instill a sense of place or a sense of visitor experience. And they're categorized by level of change. So you'll see that the bars along the top that talk about areas to preserve, strengthen, enhance, and transform. We call that our PSET strategy. So that was basically the organizational framework from which we started this whole process of going from this kind of preserve to transform areas to the character area typologies that you'll see below, and then ultimately to the future land use map. So all of our areas to transform are basically our activity centers, some of our multifamily communities, and this whole exercise is not about zoning. It doesn't prescribe zoning. This is really about how to inform our future zoning by describing either the current character of the neighborhood that we want to preserve, or trying to identify what the future intended character we envision it will look like based on where they fall on this whole kind of PSET scale. Next slides, please. So we use the character area the character areas to formulate our hybrid scenario, or which ultimately resulted in our future land use map. So again, we didn't pick one of those 4 scenarios. We picked elements of the 4 based on community feedback and based on the infrastructure demands that we were able to analyze with each. And so this hybrid scenario became the flume with the 18 character areas. Again, it's not intended to be looked at a zoning level or a parcel level. Rather, it's to be interpreted broadly. So we're basically using these land use categories to evaluate what the desired character and objectives are for these different areas around the county. And then we apply that guidance in context with the general plan policies and recommendations. So you'll see the policies and recommendations throughout the plan that can refer back to the future land use map. So in comparison to Plan Howard 2030, you'll see we're basically replacing the old land use map on the left with our new land use map on the right. It's quite a bit, it's more colorful, if you will. But basically, it's not that vastly different. It is really a refinement of the Plan Howard 2030 land use map. We had 4 place types. We're moving to 18 character areas. But Plan Howard 2030 is really the baseline. And where you see those large swaths of pink, those were the growth and revitalization areas in Plan Howard 2030. They were along corridors and within our village centers. And we're basically taking those large areas and we're honing in more directly in specific areas to make recommendations for growth. And by doing so, it provides a higher level of predictability and with an emphasis, again, on what the character of those areas should look like. And so this is a closer look at our proposed activity centers. Each area is zoomed in. So these are the areas that we are targeting for the most amount of growth. This is what we modeled in our fiscal model, and in terms of where we expect most of the growth to occur. And Jeff Brownell is gonna show some of that in his presentation next. So if you kind of keep this visual in mind as he's talking about the activity centers, these are the areas we're talking about. And this actually only accounts for about 3% of the county's land. And so what we're looking at is these activity centers to accommodate a mix of employment, residential, commercial uses, and really serve as the greatest area for transformation within the county. And as Brian mentioned, we talk about this as a redevelopment plan because as he showed, we have very little land left, only 2% for greenfield development. So we really need to focus on redevelopment and allowing these activity centers to address our housing and commercial demand while also reducing impacts to infrastructure and the environment. So most of these centers are already older shopping centers that are impervious, that are already developed, and older business parks. So when we redevelop them, there is a real potential to improve the stormwater management and the overall environmental conditions of these sites. So you'll see that some of the areas identified are our Columbia activity centers, like the village centers, which is the same as our last general plan, also downtown and Gateway, which is new, and some areas along the Snowden to Auburn corridor. We're also targeting activity centers along Route 40 and Route 1, similar to Plan Howard 2030, but also like more targeted and more specific to provide greater predictability along those corridors. And finally, there's 2 new centers along the 108 corridor that we're targeting for redevelopment potential. And so hopefully folks are familiar with our downtown Columbia plan, where there is recommendations for basically growth over the next through 2030. The next area that we kind of call we refer to as the last frontier in Howard County is Gateway, which is over 1,000 acres of.
Amy, excuse me real quick. This is Steve. Are we holding any questions till the end? Is there going to be like a Q&A period, or can I ask you a question right now?
I'll defer to Holly. I think we were going to wait till the end of our presentation, and then Jeff Brownell, and then take some questions on this, and then we'll move into some of the fiscal stuff with Jeff Brownell. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I just don't want to forget my question about the corridors, so okay. I will ask it once you get there. Thank you.
We could always type it in the chat, and I can, start looking at the chat when I'm done. If you don't want to.
Yeah, I'll try to figure out how to do that on my phone. Okay, very good.
Okay.
Yeah, Amy. After you guys the presentation, as you mentioned, that we'll leave some time for discussion and before go to Jeff's presentation.
Yeah. Sorry, I know it's a lot. It's a lengthy plan. And we're trying to condense 700 pages into
no, I appreciate it. I just want to make sure the committee has time to ask some questions.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so next to downtown, as I was mentioning, Gateway, we see as having great potential for redevelopment. And so HOCO by Design proposes to transform Gateway into what we're calling a regional activity center. Next slide, Sarah, please. So the regional activity center approach looks at Gateway to become a major employment hub that is also planning for housing, open space, civic uses, maintaining some of the industrial uses that are already present there, and really building a complete community for the 21st century. And HOCO by Design is really establishing the vision for Gateway and some of the recommendations, but really full development of that area won't happen until after we undertake an entire master plan for the Gateway area, and with development activity that's not expected until over the long term. So probably towards the end of our planning horizon with this general plan. So this is really a long-term vision, but we're starting it within HOCO by Design. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, that the next step for Gateway would be for us to develop a master plan, which we intend to do once HOCO by Design is adopted. That plan will identify the types of development we want to see there, the phasing of that development, the intensity of that development, the scale, design, infrastructure needs. We'll do a much more detailed data analysis. We'll look at different design concepts, and we'll also go through another community engagement process with not only the property owners, but also the broader community. As I mentioned, the footprint of Gateway is about 1,000 acres. So it's really a significant opportunity to meet our employment targets for the county and also accommodate a population that can support these businesses within the activity center. Also important to note is about 40% of this area is already impervious. So there's a real opportunity to improve the environmental conditions of the site and accommodate infrastructure that's needed to support the development in this entire area. So being able to accommodate schools on site, fire stations if needed, park and recreational needs, not only for Gateway, but for the surrounding community, etc. So in addition to Gateway, I'm sorry, I failed to mention, we have a whole focus area section of no, you can go next slide, it's okay. We have a focus area section in HOCO by Design that is dedicated to looking extensively at Gateway, kind of setting that vision for the master plan. We also talk about Newtown Columbia in that section as well, which is, I think, technical appendix C. So for Newtown Columbia, that whole section was developed as a result of 3 workshops. Next slide, please. I think Brian mentioned these as he was going through our community engagement, but we did these workshops. The first was a virtual meeting where our consultants presented general design principles to the community to get a sense for how they fit with Columbia and to kind of hear those design preferences from the community. From there, we did an open house where we showed different boards that had illustrative concepts for redevelopment of village centers, parking lots, older apartment complexes, and some employment areas along Snowden-Dobbin. And then from the results of those 2, the open house and the virtual meeting, we hosted what we called a big ideas public workshop, where we reported out on the results that we heard from the community. We had an urban design consultant, Mahan Reichel, who provided recommendations for potential or preferred redevelopment scenarios. And those recommendations included things like the locations of buildings, what the streetscape should look like, how to incorporate green space, the importance of connectivity, and other such design elements. And again, those can all be found in our focus areas, both the work that we did with the Newtown community, which also included Gateway. And in addition to that, design recommendations for, next slide, for our rural crossroads, which are areas out west. All that can be found in the focus areas technical appendix of the plan. Next slide. So continuing on this kind of emphasis of specific areas within the county, we also produced a companion document to HOCO by Design, and that is basically a plan for the Route 1 corridor, otherwise also known as Washington Boulevard. Next slide. And so this whole effort kind of started before the general plan, but as we be embarking on the general plan, we decided it made more sense to kind of roll this whole Route 1 planning process into HOCO by Design, to be able to look at things more holistically, but then also more focused along the corridor. And so that resulted in this plan for Washington Boulevard that is that kind of works in junction with the general plan with HOCO by Design. It was able to incorporate the activity centers, which is a big component of the plan. It goes into much more detail about the 3 activity centers that are proposed along the corridor. It also, a big recommendation is for the county to invest in a redevelopment authority. I think that we've seen that zoning alone is not helping us realize the vision that the county has had for that corridor over the last couple decades. And we really feel like what's needed to move the needle in the corridor is a redevelopment authority that's able to acquire land, assemble land, and have that kind of public-private partnership component to realize the vision that we are trying to achieve and set forth in HOCO by Design. And within this more specific Route 1 plan. Other components of the plan talk about encouraging property reinvestment through tools like tax credits and small business resources. Again, we do a much deeper dive into the activity centers and creating a sense of place, like a unique sense of place for these activity centers. We recognize the importance of our historic communities of Elkridge and Savage as our northern and southern gateways, and how to make sure we preserve and enhance the historic character of those areas. We recognize the environmental features along the corridor and the need to restore and protect them. And finally, I think we all know that there are a number of safety issues along the Route 1 corridor. And so establishing a safe and efficient transportation corridor is of utmost importance. Expanding the ability to walk there, bike there, expanding transit opportunity or frequencies there, and of course, also being able to accommodate the truck traffic that we need through truck management and reducing some of the congestion. Also, important component of our Route 1 plan. So next, I'm going to quickly move through our planning themes. These are the major chapters of HOCO by Design that contain the vast amount of our policies and implementing actions. These have all actually been released to the public over the last year. We released one at a time. We got public feedback. We've incorporated all of that feedback into the planning themes. So what you're seeing now are kind of almost final versions of them. But again, we are still open to receiving additional feedback. The first one is ecological health. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I just want to hit at a high level some of the components of these planning themes. So ecological health advances our planning goal to protect our environment. It's about deepening our commitment to environmental stewardship, protecting sensitive environmental resources, and providing measures to address climate change. The next one is County in Motion. It advances the goals of transportation options in the county through a safe and equitable and sustainable transportation system, enhancing public transit to better connect the county and the region, and expanding safe and convenient walking, cycling, and transit options, which reduces our reliance on automobiles and also mitigates climate impacts. Then we have economic prosperity. The goal here is to strengthen economic opportunities by supporting the jobs and housing workforce, attracting a diverse employment base through investment in access to education and resources, and supporting local businesses and business districts. Then we have dynamic neighborhoods. This advances the goals of promoting a diverse housing choices in the county, such as missing middle and accessory dwelling units, creating opportunities for age-friendly and multi-generational communities, supporting housing opportunities for all income levels, and preserving our affordable housing stock. And finally, the last theme is quality by design. This is where we advance the planning goals of prioritizing community character. So we look to preserve our existing neighborhood character, create more walkable outdoor open spaces and amenities, document our historic resources, especially those that tell the story of our diverse history, and then define unique and varied character of the county. So before I talk about the next steps, I want to take a moment to point out the additional contents in our draft and the ones that I think probably pertain the most to this committee. So if you can go to the next slide, this just kind of shows the plan starts with an introduction. Then in chapter 2, that is a really critical chapter, I think, for this committee. It's the growth and conservation framework chapter. And it's strategies to balance growth and conservation. It features our land use map, and it's supported by technical appendix B, which gets into all the details of those character areas I talked about. And so if you can go to the next slide, because I think this is, yeah. So again, so chapter 2 talks about, goes through our land supply, the demands. Brian kind of showed the demands that our economic consultant projected through the market study, which is the 31,000 housing units, 60,000 jobs that's laid out there. It also talks about the capacity that we have to accommodate those jobs and those housing units. And then it talks about an overall strategy for growth and conservation, including the fiscal impacts. And so we actually talk about the Spending Affordability Committee, what their recommendations were from last year, and some of the fiscal challenges that the county will face in terms of our budget and how we try to accommodate this new growth. So that's an important chapter. Also for this committee is the infrastructure chapter, which is chapter 8. And that looks at, makes recommendations for the capital budget and how our different departments, our different agencies, and our partner agencies are going to try to accommodate or implement the different general plan policies and implementing actions. And then chapter 9 is managing growth. And this chapter talks about adequate public facilities and how we pace growth so that our infrastructure, our schools, roads, our water, and our services can be developed in conjunction with the growth projections that Jeff Brownell is going to show in his presentation. So if nothing else, hopefully this committee can take a look at chapter 8 and chapter 9. We also, in chapter 9, we make a number of recommendations for an APFO task force that's going to be convened after the general plan. We make a number of recommendations for specific topics that they should deliberate and research, look at as they do their deliberations. And so, and then we also have the implementation chapter. This talks about how we're going to monitor and report on the plan, and also assigns all of the different implementing actions to different agencies and identifies the lead and supporting agencies for basically implementing the general plan. And so here are the next steps. So basically the plan is out. We're collecting public comment through January 16th. We're going to have, we had a work session with the planning board. We're going to do another one on January 5th. Then after that, once we close the public comment, we will be reviewing those comments, incorporating them as appropriate into a final plan. That final plan will then be filed for both planning board consideration and for county council adoption in the spring. We do anticipate it will be probably a lengthy adoption process with a number of work sessions with the county council. So that could take a few months to move through. So we're hoping to have the plan in place, hopefully by the end of the fiscal year. And then just real quick, I just wanted to note kind of what happens afterwards, right? So after the plan is adopted, we really don't see future development activity according to this plan for a good, 5 to 6 years. The first thing we're going to need to do is undergo a comprehensive rezoning. So we need to make sure that our zoning regulations, our land development regulations are consistent with the new general plan. This general plan is it is different than the last in terms of, I share the new character areas and the 18 character areas and the different land use areas. So we'll have a lot of work to do to rezone the county. We also, the code requires that we convene an AFFO committee to evaluate the current APFO regulations and to make recommendations. And so that will happen a year after general plan adoption. And then the results of those two efforts, that will set the stage for future development, which of course takes another 2 to 3 years to get through the pipeline. So all this to just kind of put into context like the long-term perspective of this whole effort that we're here to talk about. So with that concludes our portion of the presentation. And I guess we'll go ahead and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Amy. I think we should be able to have a time for 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A before we go to the next speaker. And Steve had a question earlier. Steve, I think the IT host just cleared your
Yeah.
IT. Can you speak now? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm here. I thought I typed it in the chat, but I didn't. But as you were going through the different, I think you called them focus areas, your Route 40, Columbia, down the Route 1 corridor, and the revitalization opportunities for older redevelopment, especially to help with density and stormwater management, environmental impact. That sounded exactly like the old Route 1 revitalization plan, which you mentioned a few slides later and talked about how that needs a development authority maybe to help jumpstart that. So how do we keep those other areas, because those are private ownership, there's no impetus for redevelopment unless they want to do it. How do we keep those from becoming the new Route 1 that nothing happens? Is there discussion about creating an overall development authority or for multiple locations, kind of like some of those development authorities in Baltimore City? What are we thinking to create the ability for that to happen, or not even the ability, but to drive the redevelopment we want to see? Because people might just sit there and say, no, I don't want to do anything with my older center, or I don't want to do anything with this, that, or the other.
I mean, I think that's a good point. I mean, this is, the general plan sets the vision for how, where we want to see areas that we see the most growth potential. But that doesn't necessarily, I mean, much of this is going to be market driven. There are a number of factors that basically play into growth in a community, right? So what is the market demand? What are the economic conditions? What's the lending environment? The land use controls that we put in place. So after this, we're going to have to, like I mentioned, we're going to have to update our regulations. And so maybe there's incentives that could be put in place through that to try to incentivize development in certain areas. Also, look at maybe strengthening some of the current regulations. We're also going to have to look at how we try to effectuate some of these character areas and the design principles associated with them. There's also the will of individual property owners, right? So if I'm a property owner, I need to not only be able to financially develop my property, but I need to want to make the investment at a given time. So actually in chapter 2, we talk about the different factors that influence growth. Some of them are within the county's control and some of them are not. They're larger market forces. So we do talk about the potential for a redevelopment authority and kind of exploring that and whether or not that makes sense for Route 1. So, you know, other than that, I think, you know, it's a complex, it's a complex formula that goes into all of this.
Okay, I understand. I just want to make sure that from our perspective, if we're going to be, and Holly, maybe I'm not understanding completely the role of, you went over the role of the committee for the whole, you know, session, but the idea is that we're going to comment on the financial projections that are within the design plan, but those are based on these redevelopment options that may or may not happen, correct?
Exactly.
Correct.
Okay. So just preparing the committee that you're going to have to caveat it that, hey, if this, then that, because, you know, people may not want to do this. And Amy, I think you're spot on about that. It would be great if we could, in a vacuum, say this is going to happen first, then this is going to happen, and we can get the redevelopment we want. These are the areas that we want to focus on, and they're the ones that make the most sense for the county from a infrastructure standpoint and an impact standpoint. But we all have to recognize that, you know, these are all if people are willing to redevelopment and we do get those numbers of units in those different areas. So that's all.
That's an excellent point. And I think that what you'll see as Jeff goes through his presentation is that even, you know, even through the last general plan and the current AFFO allocations that we have, we haven't been realizing them for years. So we've had more housing allocations available than the market has demanded. And Jeff's going to show some of those numbers in the next presentation. So, so what we're projecting are really targets and where we would have, you know, the levels of growth that we want to see in the county, so that we can sustain the basically the economic impacts that we have been seeing, the fiscal impacts that we've been seeing. We want to, you know, to be able to ensure kind of that steady state growth over the next 10 years. That's how we've kind of adapted our growth targets.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that.
I have a quick follow-up question on the whole Route 1 redevelopment vision. Is there a vision for Route 1, having done a Route 1 redevelopment project under the old 2000 guidelines? I mean, a lot has happened there, but there's great renderings of what you expect and anticipate and hope to accomplish in Gateway. Is there a similar vision for Route 1, or is it still, you know, a scattered, there's such small scattered sites up and down the corridor? Is there a vision of what the final looks like, and is there a plan on how to get there, or will that be the purview of the Route 1 Redevelopment Authority?
So yeah, so the plan for Route 1 that's included with HOCO by Design, it's kind of a standalone plan that will be adopted as part of the general plan. So it would have the weight of the general plan, but it also kind of stands alone. And there is a vision for the corridor. And basically what we're doing, I mean, Route 1 is just so difficult, right? Because we have, it's the home of our industrial base, and we need to maintain that, right? So it's how do you find that balance of maintaining these prime industrial lands, continuing to grow our industrial base, but also improving the safety, the accessibility, and the aesthetics of the overall corridor, right? And so, you know, we've all seen that the zoning that's in place now hasn't necessarily effectuated the type of redevelopment that I think some of the past efforts have called for. So what we're trying to do is target mixed use development in 3 distinct nodes along the corridor. So in the northern, kind of middle and southern nodes of the corridor, where we've seen some initial catalytic redevelopment activity, where we see opportunities because of nearby connectivity, where we see opportunities because there's currently underutilized land, etc. So I encourage you to take a look at that. We try to create a guidance or recommendations for a sense of place in each of these areas. One thing that's new that we are attempting with this effort is a new what we'll call kind of a new activity center ideal called an industrial mixed use activity center. So this is done in other places of the country where you try to promote a mix of uses that can include light industrial uses so that we're able to continue to retain some of that light industrial land. So you could have things like warehousing, flex space, breweries, maker spaces, things of that nature, which can also help create a really interesting, unique sense of place in some of these areas.
Thanks.
Thank you. Also, anybody else have a question? You can also type in the chat box. I have one quick questions before we go to the next speaker. I know like the general plan update provide a lot of interesting identified issues or gaps and also notable changes or transformation and emerging trends there. One thing mentioned is the missing middle in the housing. Can you, one of you, illustrate a little bit and how does the Local by Design address that?
Sure. Yeah, we really didn't get much into the housing recommendations, but one of the big recommendations of HOCO by Design, and this is really a nationwide trend that we're seeing to address the lack of not only affordable but workforce housing across, particularly in Howard County, but regionally and nationally. You know, everyone's grappling with this: is housing our workforce and increasing the supply thereof. So one of our recommendations is for what we call missing middle housing. And that is, it's more affordable because it tends to be a little smaller in size and scale. So it is your typologies that are like a duplex or a triplex or a quadplex. It includes like smaller single family attached, multifamily housing, maybe some cottage courts. We have some nice slides that kind of depict what some of these typologies look like. But creating opportunities in some of our single family zoning districts to accommodate this type of missing middle housing that, you know, when you look at a duplex, triplex, or quadplex, those can look like a large single family home. So it's nice that they can fit within the character of a single family neighborhood, but they can provide a more affordable price point for some of our more moderate income, you know, workforce, either, you know, residents of the county or people that work in the county that want to live in the county. And so that is accommodated not only in our policies, but also in some of our in our growth projections that Jeff's going to show.
Thank you, Amy.
So, hi, this is Kalida. I had a question. So this is, pardon the ignorance of the question. I wanted to understand the impact of rezoning as opposed to the rights of the property owners, because can the county rezone and peel back what the property owners may have intended for, for example, if they wanted mixed use housing, or if they wanted some specific type of zoning, does the county have the authority to change that and then against the will of the property owner, I guess? Or I'm trying to understand how the county can implement a plan when you might have litigation, the opposition from people who own large swaths of land.
Sure. So of course, that process occurs through the comprehensive rezoning. So the way it works in Maryland is you update your general plan, ideally once a decade. And then immediately following that, you will update not only your zoning regulations, so you'll create new zoning regulations that are consistent with your new general plan, but you'll also update the zoning map. So it's a two-part process, right? So properties will be, through that process, properties would be rezoned. Some of them may be upzoned, some of them may be downzoned. It's a legislative process. It is countywide, so there'll be a good deal of public engagement with the community, an opportunity for members of the public to come and address the legislative body about, how they may want to see their property, the results for their property. But ultimately, yeah, it's a legislative process, and it will be up to the county council to adopt a new zoning map at the end of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we need to move on to the next speaker now. And thank you for the great questions from committee. And also Amy, Brian, Sarah, and the whole team basically have been really spending tons of time in the last couple of years on this project, and much appreciation. So can we allow Jeff to share screen, and he's gonna go over the trends. Thank you so much. So Jeff. I think you are muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Let's see here.
Yeah, it's working now. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Good morning. Thank you, Holly. My name is Jeff Brano. I'm the chief of the research division for DPZ. It's nice to be back. I presented in front of this group for many years. So what I'm going to do today is Holly has asked me to sort of divide this into two parts. So the first part is going to be what I typically present to the SAAC, which is looking at the population growth trends, including the latest data from the 2020 census, and also what's currently in the pipeline for a residential and non-residential in the land use capacity. We update our projections every year, typically in September. And then I give those projections to the school system for their population, their student projections. Also give it to other agencies depending on their planning time frame. For example, the DPW Water and Sewer Master Plan, Parks and Rec, things of that nature. So everybody has a consistent set of projections based on our current actual capacity that we estimate at the time each year. So I'm going to present that to this group. It sort of provides a framework of where we are now. Also talk a little bit about the past of where we've come from. And then the second part of the presentation will be really a continuation of what Amy and Brian presented, which is the projections for the HOCO by design, the population or the housing and the job projections for HOCO by design. And that's going to feed into the fiscal impact analysis. The intent is for us to present the fiscal impact results based on these projections on the 13th, so next Tuesday, given the time constraints. So this is a good sort of way to do it because it looks at our typical things that we do and how that feeds into HOCO by design moving forward. So first, to go over population growth, you've seen this before. This is where Howard County's been. It's grown, over the last 50 years plus. Like many suburbs around the country. And you can see that in 2020, which is the last decennial census, there was about 332,000 people living in the county. That's an increase from the 287 in 2010, the decade before. This shows the absolute growth for each of those decades. And so you can see the greatest percent increase occurred in the 70s. That's about a 92% increase, about 56,000 more people. That was when Columbia was getting going in the 70s, and then it of course continued in the 80s and 90s. So we had a lot of growth in terms of almost doubling the population that decade. And then in the 80s had a slower rate of growth at 58%, but it was the greatest in terms of absolute numbers of people, with close to 69,000 people. And then in the 90s, it slowed down, and we created an APFO in 1992. And that was in large part the reason why we did see slower growth, because at that time we had plenty of land capacity, but we managed growth through a new APFO beginning in the early 90s. And then in 2000, with the 2000 general plan, we also had the AFFO in place and actually slow growth even more. And you can see that 16% growth in the 2000s. And then last decade, we actually, even though the rate of growth was the same at 16%, the number of people actually grew a little bit by, an additional 6,000 compared to the decade before. The question is, why did we grow? There's a couple of reasons. One, so we did actually have a little bit more housing units in the last decade compared to the previous decade. And I have some slides showing what that is in a minute. The other reason is it's an interesting situation that we've noticed. It's household size in Howard County. So household size has been decreasing in Howard County in many places all over the country, given the change in demographics and the aging of the population, et cetera. So in 1980, for example, it was 2.97, and then it dropped to about 2.7, but then it increased a little bit the last decade between 2010 and 20. And it's not a lot of an increase. It's only about a 2% or 1.8% increase, the difference between 2.72 and 2.77. But even that, 2% adds up, because if you have a base household population, we have about 125,000 households in the county. You apply that 2%, that adds about 6,000 more residents. So this will be an interesting trend to look at, this change in household size. And Howard County appeared unique with that. So as I mentioned, it went from 2.72 to 2.77. And then if you compare that to the region as a whole, the region as a whole stayed about the same. And the state of Maryland stayed about the same. So it's really not a statewide trend. It's really unique to Howard County. Baltimore County also was the other place that experienced, I think it's like a 1.6% increase. So it's really Howard County and Baltimore County. And then even though our great neighbor to the south, which is much bigger than the Baltimore region, the suburban Washington region, including Frederick, Montgomery, and PG, that's only 3 counties in that whole region. But you can see that part of our area also stayed about the same. So there wasn't change in household size. So Howard County is unique. So it's going to be interesting to follow those trends moving forward. Why has that happened? It's it could be because the school system. Howard County has, as we all know, an excellent school system, has the reputation of being an excellent school system. So it attracts families with children, school-age children. So that could be part of it. The other part is Howard County is continuing to grow its diversity. So we have one of the most highest levels of foreign born in the county. So there could be it could be multi-generational households living as the county diversifies. So anyways, we just wanted to point that out because it does have an impact on the budget and the fiscal aspects of things. If you think about for every house, if we're serving more people. I don't expect the household size to continue to increase, but it will be interesting to see, or it may be, but the question is, how much, or will it go back down? Is this an anomaly? We will see where that heads, but it was an important thing to point out. So this chart goes to 2020, and then the red is our latest projections. So as I indicated before, we do our projections every September or fall based on our land use. We have a land use database, and we sort of freeze it on September 30th, tracks all the housing units, tracks everything in the development pipeline, and looks at our latest zoning so we can estimate future land use capacity. So based on that, we come up with new projections, which we share with other county agencies. And this is the latest about, we're still going to experience growth over the next decade, although it's going to slow. As Amy mentioned, we're running out of land. We've all known this for a while. So based on our current capacity, under the current general plan, Plan Howard 2030, this is sort of what an estimate of the future. So the growth for the next decade is about 9% compared to 16%. And then the decade after that, growth is expected to slow even more, by 5% based on our current capacity. So now let's look at the new housing and land use. Where you have people, you need to have housing. And so this is looking at our historical housing. So beginning in 2001, in the 2000s, we averaged about 1,500 housing units per year. And then the last decade, I mentioned before that we had a little bit of an increase in housing. In large part, that was due to the adoption of the downtown plan, which happened in 2010. So the downtown plan allowed for redevelopment of downtown Columbia. And so you'll see those spikes. That's when apartment units are built, primarily in downtown Columbia, and also a lot of redevelopment along the Route 1 corridor. The full vision hasn't been met, but we still have had those zoning categories since 2000 plan in the Route 1 corridor, which has yielded some units, some apartment units, a fair number of apartment units. One thing to notice on this, so we have been experiencing growth. So even though the last 10 years was about 1,600, if you look at the last 6 or so years, the growth is slowing, about 1,300. We have building permits through October in this of 2022, so we don't have the last 2 months of the year. But it's interesting to look at, there's only 554. So we don't expect, I don't think any apartment projects are coming through. So it's probably going to be around 600, 650 for the year, which is the lowest it's been, as you can see, in the last 20 years. So I don't know if you recall, we had that urban analytics, we had that fiscal impact study conducted by Urban Analytics that the SAAC requested back in 2019 when the AFFO law was changed, which made the AFFO test for schools stricter. It added a high school test and lowered the percentages when schools were closed to development. For elementary, it was lowered to 105% from 115%. For middle schools, it was lowered from 110% to actually 115% to 110%, and then added a new high school test. And so the SAAC thought, what impact would that have on housing? And we had actually in that projection estimated that when that went into effect in 2019, about 3 years later, which is now, we would have less growth. And we're seeing it here for 2022. It actually has dropped a bit. Now, a lot of it, quite frankly, is not related. It's market driven. There's market forces, timing. There's all sorts of things. So this, it's really, we estimated it, but I guess you could say we also had a bit of luck because it is just an estimate, but it really shows these trends of slowing growth into the future. This chart shows the same thing as before, except it's by unit type. So the blue is single family detached. The green is single family attached or townhouse units, and the red is apartment units. So you can see when you have large apartment projects or several large apartment projects permitted in a single year, you get those spikes that happen every other year or so in the last decade. The trend is that we've experienced more apartment units and less single family detached based on land use, and that's expected to occur in the future. We've known this was happening. We've anticipated this happening with the last plan. The current HOCO by design continues the anticipation, knowing that much of the future growth will have to be done in these activity centers, which are going to be mixed use development, which are going to be apartments and also missing middle, townhomes, that sort of thing, and less single family detached homes. This shows what I just mentioned. You can see the percentage of different units by type in the 2000s compared to the last decade, 2011 through 2021. An increase from about 28% to 42% apartments, and you can see the decrease in single family detached. So this is, you've seen this chart before. So this is again based on our September 30th freeze. To explain each of the bars, the existing bar is, that's how many housing units we have in the county, 124,000 housing units. And then the permit are housing units that have received building permits. So they're under construction right now and will be built shortly. The unbuilt represents subdivisions that have been recorded. So it would basically be lots that are available to build on that don't yet have building permits. It also could be approved site development plans for an apartment project, for example, that also does not yet have building permits. The in process is about 5,000. That's units in subdivision plans that DPZ or Land Development Division is reviewing right now that have not yet been approved. So once they're approved, then they move forward to unbuilt and permitted. Many of these projects are long-term projects that are phased out over 5 to 10 years. I should say not many, but several of them are. So we're not going to see all these units at once. The number in process actually has come down. I don't know if you recall, that number used to be bigger, like 8,000, 9,000. So given our limited land supply, that number is dropping. It does take, several years for it to get to the process and be built. It's still uncertain when those units are going to be built. We do our best, but market forces are at play with when those actually get built. And then the undeveloped is what we estimate that for future redevelopment capacity and also our undeveloped land capacity, which isn't much. Amy had mentioned the 2%. So a lot of this is, for example, in downtown Columbia and redevelopment opportunities. And then so our total capacity is 144 or 145,000 units. So we have the capacity of about 20,000 new homes. If you divide that by 18 years, assuming it's going to happen in 18 years, that's about 1,125 new units per year. And that's about a 27% reduction of the about close to 1,500 we've had over the last 2 decades. So that's something to kind of keep in mind when I talk next about where we want HOCO by design to take us. So similar to the existing or the last 2 decades, what's happening, we're expecting to have more apartments and less, SFD units with the mixed units. This is our growth capacity. So the bars in the middle represent our future. What's on the left is existing, and then the total results on the left. The future growth is, mostly apartments and townhomes mixed use if you combine them 2 together. Less single family detached. Now, if you look by planning area, the next slide is going to show that growth by planning area. Wanted to show this map first. You can't really see the dark lines all that clear, but we have 5 planning areas. Elk Ridge is along here. Actually, I'm seeing it on my screen. Can you see here? Yeah, so Elk Ridge is along here. Ellicott City is this area here. Columbia is, as we know, Columbia. It also includes not just Newtown, but it also includes the out parcels within the Columbia area. The southeast is everything south of 175 going out through Maple Lawn, south of Columbia. And then the rural west is everything west of the planned service area boundary. The planned service area boundary is important. It's been in effect for a long time, since the 80s. It's been refined over time. Basically, everything west of that line, there's no water or sewer, no public utilities. So it's large lot, well and septic, single family development with some commercial nodes. And the emphasis has been for the last few decades to preserve the rural west. So that's where our agricultural preservation program is, and we have a lot of environmental preservation. I have a slide showing that in a minute. So those are the 5 planning areas. And if you look at those 5 planning areas, the blue is the existing, and this is where we're projecting growth based on our current capacity. So, most of it's in Columbia. This undeveloped really represents the remaining of downtown Columbia, the downtown Columbia plan, plus maybe some village center revitalization opportunities. And then you can see that other planning areas, you still have growth, but less so. The rural west is the least of all, given the capacity in the rural west. We've really met our preservation goals in the west over the last several decades. This is our latest land use map, and this is, if you want to look at this, we have 2 versions of it. It's quite interesting. So we have a PDF version on the map gallery on the county GIS website, and then we also have an interactive version where you can zoom in and see all these things. Here's the legend here. It may not be completely readable, so I apologize for that. The point I wanted to make here is this light yellow is undeveloped residential. And so this gets to the 2% that Amy had mentioned. There's not a lot of undeveloped residential if you were to zoom into this map. And so you have also undeveloped commercial as well, and you can see that in the light purple and the light reds. The purple is the industrial land, The red is the commercial and office space land. The sort of dark yellow is existing residential units. And then the green is parks and open space and preservation easements throughout the county. So this summarizes our land use. We haven't quite updated it to 2022, working on that now. So this is from last year, but I did want to point out that this is our current situation about, so most of our developed land is residential. This about 20% is commercial, industrial. This includes roadways and all of that, utility right-of-ways. Now this 7.2% undeveloped, the difference between this and the 2% is that this 7.2%, and it's probably less now, it includes committed. So basically it includes projects in the pipeline. So it includes subdivisions under review. It includes permitted units. It includes subdivisions that have been recorded and soon will be built over the next few years. So that's the committed. We had a fair amount in the pipeline, as you've seen before. The 2% is the raw undeveloped land, and that's where that comes from. Did want to point out about 40% of land has been preserved. The largest portion of it is in the rural West. It really consists of two categories. So it includes open space and parkland, which is the park is owned by Howard County. It includes state parkland and includes WSSC land. So it's active and passive parkland. And then the preservation easements, that's not owned by the state or the county or government entity. It's owned private ownership, but it's a permanent, in most cases, preservation easements that you can't build on. So they're permanently preserved in perpetuity. And it includes agricultural easements in the West primarily, and also environmental easements in the West. And then also there's some environmental easements in the East. So this started about 2 decades ago, or 3 decades ago, probably, this goal to preserve land, and the county has been very successful with that. So now getting into HOCO by design. So taking all that in context, what are our projections? Now, Amy mentioned the FLUME, the future land use map. So if you hear the word FLUME, that's what that stands for, and all of the activity centers. There's different types of activity centers. There's downtown Columbia. There's the regional activity center, which is, the gateway. We don't have gateway in our projections yet because the intent, and which I'll show in a second, the intent is to do a master plan, as Amy said, to figure out what we envision for gateway, and also what those projections, how many the density could handle in terms of infrastructure. We don't want to presume the infrastructure can be managed. It's going to be a part of a gateway master plan, similar to the way the downtown Columbia master plan was conducted, to ensure adequate infrastructure. So a master plan will be conducted, and then we'll have unit potential in gateway. Other activity centers, there's these mixed use activity centers in the pink. Some of them are existing already as part of the last plan. A lot of them are, in fact. We have the Village Center activity centers, which are, Columbia Village Center potential development. Transit activity centers, that's primarily the TOD, transit-oriented development, where next to rail line, the 3 that currently exists now, so that's not a change. And then, as Amy mentioned, there's a new industrial mixed-use activity center to try to get that mixed-use placemaking industrial. So there's a lot more detail on the future land use map that leads into the projections. And so here's the chart. This is the AFFO chart. This is in the plan. It's in chapter 2, I believe. It's similar to the chart in the current general plan. It basically is the chart that is the driver of APFO. So it provides a cap of units. And so it begins in 2026 because the intention is to have this plan adopted this spring. So the first year of the APFO will be 2026, 3 years from 2023. That's the way APFO works. You give out allocations 3 years in the future because it takes about 3 years to get through the process. And this is our breakdown. Downtown Columbia is fixed based on the plan. It's no change from last year. Here's all of the various activity center totals. So 9,000 units in the activity centers. All remaining other character areas, which includes, the missing middle and the infill and re-subdivision potential, the undeveloped land. We also have missing middle in the activity centers too. Rural West, the capacity is such that this is what we think we may have FY24, and this is probably pretty aggressive actually. And then we're keeping the green neighborhoods set aside. That's in the current AFFO chart. I think it's been in the previous AFFO chart, even in the 2000 plan. It was added actually in the middle of the 2000s. In our subdivision regulations, we have incentives to build green, meaning if you have environmental, sustainable site development plans and also the building structure itself, you can get green neighborhood allocations to go ahead and build for there. That total is about 1433 average. So it goes back to that sort of average I mentioned before, close to where we've been historically. Now, this is for the fiscal, which we're going to talk about the results next meeting, but this is the number of units in the fiscal impact analysis, around 25,000 units from 2022 through 2040. It's an 18-year fiscal impact analysis. That's because the plan goes through 2040, and we wanted to use, and we're working very closely with Holly in the budget office, we wanted to use the latest and greatest budget, the FY23 budget that's been adopted as the basis of it. So we have to align the levels of service with the current budget. So we're starting with the base year of 2022, and then to get the 3 additional years from the from 2023 through 2025 for the chart. It's sort of complicated, but this is how we came up with it. I hope it's understandable. But the point is, we're trying to match the fiscal with the chart along with the pipeline growth over the next 3 years. And so one thing to point out is that this 1433, it's greater than the 1,125 capacity that I showed you, but it's a little bit less than the 1540, what we've been experiencing. So in order for this growth projection to be realized, we do have to add some capacity through the activity centers. And I think this gets back to Steve's question and follow up on what Amy had said. We recognize that you can't just assume that everything's going to be built in these activity centers, all at once. It takes time. It takes, it's going to take, as Amy mentioned, 3-5 years to actually implement this stuff. And so this is really a realistic projection, we think, but it will, realistic, probably a bit, it's assuming that this activity center stuff is going to happen, and it will happen because based on the market study, there is growth pressures, there is demand for housing units. So we anticipate that will happen, but it's not going to happen necessarily anytime, soon. It's likely that this general plan will begin that or continue it really, and then the next general plan will see it also expand. So for example, Gateway, we don't have the numbers for Gateway in here, but Gateway could use these activity center projections, assuming the Gateway plan gets adopted in the next few years. And the general plan could always be amended too. So the general plan, I think, indicates the draft plan that it could be that this chart gets amended once a Gateway master plan is completed. And as I mentioned before, we wanted to do a Gateway master plan to ensure we had adequate infrastructure based on what we expect as a community or would like as a community in Gateway, for example. So the fiscal impact analysis is sort of a moderate growth approach, realizing these activity centers. It's also based on, as Amy mentioned, we've done a lot of scenarios, lots of public feedback, as Brian mentioned. So we took into our, we took into our advice of what the residents wanted, and this is sort of a balanced approach, and that's what's in the fiscal moving forward, 1,400 units per year. I have 2 more slides. I know time's running out. So this is the commercial, the non-residential job growth. Well, no, I'm sorry. This is the units, 25,000, and you can see where they're planned and by unit type. And we'll get more into this next week when we start talking about the details of the fiscal impact study. For jobs, this is historical job growth. We've had a fairly strong job growth, and we actually targeted in the last general plan last 2 general plans about 3,000 jobs per year, and we've achieved it, 3,200. In large part, that was from BRAC, the base realignment and closure, which happened, beginning in 2002 or 2010 or so. That's pretty much done. There is still some Fort Meade growth, but the we don't anticipate the same amount of job growth into the future. And so HOCO by design, the fiscal impact study uses this estimate over the 18 years of about 31,500 jobs. That's, the 1750 average annual is less than the 3,000, but based on our land use capacity, we just don't anticipate having the same amount of job growth in the past. This capacity does also assume some rezonings that occur in the activity centers to allow for this job growth. It does not include Gateway, and Gateway is another opportunity for job growth in the future. So that's the basis of the projections for HOCO by design for the fiscal. And at this point, the next steps is, it's an 18-year study. It's calibrated to the FY23 budget, and it's based on the APFO phasing chart and the job projections and the draft plan. And we'll present the results and methodology at the next SAAC meeting on December 13th. So that's it. It's
yeah,
minutes,
thank you very much, Jeff.
Try to make it in time. I know there may be questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we have to wrap up now for sake of everybody's time. And Jeff will be here next week for another 2 hours. So feel free to bring up the question at that point. And also you should also feel free to send questions to me. I will forward to him in advance if you have one for today's presentation. And also after you get a chance to review materials for next week. Next week, it's going to be a deep dive of the fiscal impact analysis, which will be the focus of the committee. And Jeff is going to present both methodology, the assumptions, and also the results there. And Jeff, my understanding, you're fine-tuning the document. It's pretty close to get finished there. So the idea is we're shooting for send everybody before the end of this week, so you get a chance to review in advance. So during the weekend, when you watch World Cup, quarterfinal, etc., please spend some time on this one as well. You might find it's equally interesting because we have a lot of number of people here and people with experience in economic development. So Jeff, do you have anything to add? If not, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't. Thank you. Yeah, so I hope to have the assumptions document that goes in the fiscal by the end of the week so people can see it beforehand. And yes, so thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to take any questions about this also at the next meeting.
Okay. Well, just go ahead. Anybody want to say anything? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all very much, and especially for our presenters and also our interpreter and IT host in the back. And thanks the committee. I'm very happy that we started another year of this process to help inform the budget development, and in particular the HOCO by design is a very important subject, and it's going to inform fiscal planning in the long run, not only in the near future but also in the long run. So thank you everybody for participation. So we will the meeting is adjourned now, and we will come back next Tuesday. And anyone, especially the new members, if you have any questions, feel free to drop me a line or drop me a note in email, and I'll give me a buzz. I'll be happy to talk with you. Thank you very much.